welcome back to the channel. We're super excited to have you today. I wanted to talk a little bit about lab setup. So are you super nervous about possibly doing a food lab or maybe just a lab in general in your classroom? So I wanted to walk you through a little bit about what goes on in my head in setting up that lab. So behind me, I actually have the food science lab that we completed in my 8th grade class earlier today. So we did the soil cupcake sampling lab. So the setup right here that you see on this table is actually day 2 of the lab. So when I think about setting up a lab, I think about a few things in advance. I know that I want to do a lab about a week out. So I think about the PO that I need to write, the purchase order that I need to do, the Walmart pickup maybe, or supplies. For this lab, in all of my food science classes, I have something called a working PO. So I write a PO at the beginning of the year for a set amount of money, and when it gets approved, it gets assigned a number. So I can use that same number throughout the entire year for all of my food labs or my classroom needs. That working PO or that open PO is super helpful because it allows me to not have to fill out a PO for every single lab, and that purchase order or that PO is good for the entire year. And it also saves me a lot of time making the PO, but yet also waiting for the approval and things like that. On that PO, I make sure I kind of plan out the labs I'm going to do and kind of know what costs I'm going to spend. So for this lab, a lot of the stuff could have been purchased in advance, and I try to correspond my labs with my other classes. So I know that in food science, during this same week that I complete this lab, I'm also doing my emulsification lab, so I need eggs for both labs. Eggs can last a certain amount of time, but if you do perishable items such as milk or something like that, it's going to take, either you need to be really specific or you need to think about how long items last for different types of labs. So most of this stuff I could purchase in advance. So I have my cake batter, and then these are things that I just keep on hand. I have food coloring and I have cupcake liners. And then I also had to purchase eggs. So I was purchasing eggs for my soil sample lab for my 8th grade class, as well as my food science class for my emulsification lab. So that one purchase is going to be used for both classes, which saves me money. It also saves me time in my Walmart grocery pickup and things like that. So I knew that this one had 3 eggs. When you buy cake mix, a tip is to look at the cake mix. Make sure that you think about whether you are going to need eggs, water. This one actually called for butter instead of oil, which we substituted that out for oil. But what do you actually need? Do you need egg whites versus things like that? So it's a thing that I've learned over the years of having to buy this kind of stuff that you might not think about if you're setting up your lab. So we are about a week out right now from our lab. We are thinking about the things we need to buy, our purchase orders, stuff like that. We're also thinking about how we want to run our lab. We're thinking about the days of the week that this is going to fall on. What's going on in school? Do we have people leaving early if we're a last hour class? Things like that. My labs typically take anywhere between 2 to 3 days, or maybe possibly 4 days, depending on the intensity of the lab. So this lab is actually going to take 3 days with my 8th graders. Day 1 of actual class time is going to be the pre-lab. So we're going to walk through the pre-lab and actually talk about what is on the pre-lab sheet, do a few hands-on activities, fill out our objectives and things like that. We do not have time in my 52-minute class period to complete the cupcakes, the assembly, the making and things like that of the cupcakes and the pre-lab. So that needs to be 2 separate days. So we complete the pre-lab. Then day 2, we come in, they do their bell ringer, we wash our hands, and we move right into the lab. So the lab is structured very step by step. They have it on their actual lab form, and it walks them through that. So the students have now, we've reviewed, we've talked about the different types of soil horizons. I have a timer on the board, so we know what's going on, we know how much time we have. In my head, I know that at this certain time, it's going to take this much time to get all the students through the lab and things like that. If this was a new lab, you want to overestimate the time that you think it's going to take your students to complete the lab. The worst thing that you can do is be in the middle of a lab and I have 5 students left of doing cupcakes and assembling their soil horizons, and the bell rings. You would either have to keep the students back if your school allows that, or you would have to somehow try to keep the batter for the next day or for you to complete that lab. So it's important to always think about time management on your actual lab days. Don't forget to think about your prep work. So in between hours, I'm putting this white tablecloth on the table. I have my bowls laid out that I can do the night before. I have all of the different items laid out on this table. The only thing I have to grab is the eggs, which I keep in the refrigerator. So that is all prep work that can be done on my end. But if you're doing a lab for individual lab groups, and each group was making this, how would you give each group each item? Are they coming up here to this table? Are you laying the white plastic out on their tables for them? Okay, so really walk through that lab in your head, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. So that's the completion of day 2, okay? If I have my upper level classes, they would be required to wash the bowl. They would be required to clean all of this up. In my 8th grade classes and even my freshman classes, I do not require them to clean this up. We do this as a group activity. We call it a lab. We have a pre-lab, lab, and a post-lab. I will make sure that this is all cleaned up and things like that. However, when we do food science, they are responsible for cleaning up their own tubs and making all of that happen. So now we've completed day 2. Our last and final day of the lab, for this lab, we will actually do our soil sampling of our cupcakes. We will eat our cupcakes, and then we will do our post-lab. Very, very rarely do we make a product and eat it the same day, just for time's sake. In my 52 minutes, it is very hard for my high school students to be able to read the directions, grab their ingredients, make the product, complete the lab, clean up, and then consume it and complete like the taste test or the finalization of that project. So I would rather spend more time on the making, the prep, the cleanup, so we've done all that efficiently. Then the next day, we can do the taste testing. We can actually talk about the product. We can kind of dive more into that, and we can actually do the post-lab all on that day. So the majority of my labs do take that 3 days, that prep work, pre-lab, prep work, lab day, cleanup, the actual consumption of the product, and the post-lab. So if you have any questions on how to set up a lab, let me know. There's another video where I went over what's in my food science totes and things like that. And I'll also post some more pictures on my blog to be able to go over some more in-depth things on this activity as well as my other labs. So reach out to me, like, follow, and comment on this video so we can stay in touch.